1. The Russian troops surrendered in Marinka and handed over the tanks to the Ukrainians. The rest fled. Sukhoi came to the rescue and was shot down. During a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center on the afternoon of Sunday, April 16, the spokesman for the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Brigadier General Alexei Hromov, said that 6 Russian tank soldiers belonged to the 392nd Tank Regiment of the Rifle Guards Division. Mechanized 42 was taken prisoner at the front along with 2 tanks during the battle at Marinka. Meanwhile, Russian military bloggers accused these 6 soldiers of surrendering to Ukrainian forces, rather than being taken prisoner at the front. Their surrender confused the Russians and caused a panic retreat, resulting in hundreds of casualties. And yet, the Russians called in air support to withdraw. One Su-25 was shot down, the rest fled. In cases where the Russian troops surrendered in the program I Want to Live, the Ukrainian side always assumed that they were taken prisoner, not voluntarily surrendered, so that later when the prisoners were returned, they would no loss of superannuation benefits and no trouble with the Russian authorities. The Battle of Marinka has been a long-running battle that has lasted for nearly 8 years. In June 2015, Marinka was the site of a day-long battle, and it was the first serious conflict after the signing of Minsk II in February, the same year. During that battle, Ukrainian forces thwarted an attack by the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, or DPR for short. The shelling of the town intensified from February 17 to February 22 last year 2022, when Russia recognized the DPR as an independent country. Fighting began in the town on March 17, 2022, almost a month after Putin invaded Ukraine. By November 2022, much of the town had been destroyed, with no civilians left, and not a single building left from the skirmishes. After the siege of Mariupol ended, the American Institute for the Study of War, or ISW, reported on May 20, 2022 that Russian and DPR forces had refocused their efforts on Marinka, allocate more forces after the siege of Mariupol ended. Throughout May, southern Marinka transferred control back and forth between Ukraine and Russia. Further Russian attacks on June 25 were repelled by Ukraine. The Russian Ministry of Defense announced on July 3 that Ukraine's 54th Mechanized Brigade had lost more than 60% of its troops and equipment. Despite those claims, fighting raged, and Russia has so far failed to capture the town. The town of Marinka is 2.6 square kilometers. For comparison, the area of Saigon's smallest district, 2, is also 4.18 square kilometers. However, Russia has launched into this battlefield 2 divisions, the 42nd Mechanized Rifle Guards Division and the 150th Motorized Rifle Division. That's not to mention the DPR Sparta Brigade. Russia trapped 2 divisions there, which allowed Ukraine to counterattack in early September last year, recapturing thousands of square miles of previously invaded territory. Since December, when news broke that Wagner troops were likely to capture Bakhmut city, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu hurriedly launched Russia's most skilled airborne brigade into the 2 battlefields of Volodar and Avdiivka to try to win a victory. Victory, as a counterweight to Wagner's army. In Volodar, only a few days, the Russian army lost 5,000 troops, 130 tanks. Major General Rustem Muradov was removed from his post. At Avdiivka, the Ukrainian army was on a high hill, and as many Russians rushed up as they did, they died in battle. Determined to win a victory, Russian General Valery Gerasimov, commanding Russian forces in Ukraine, launched his army against Marinka. The situation, according to Brigadier General Alexei Hromov, was difficult but manageable, especially when the enemy was losing some significant artillery capabilities. Indeed, in the past 24 hours, the Ukrainian artillery and air force destroyed 10 artillery systems of the 328th Artillery Regiment of the 150th Motorized Rifle Division stationed on the outskirts of Marinka. In the past 24 hours, the Russian army lost 520 troops along with 4 tanks, 10 armored vehicles, 10 artillery systems, 3 multiple launch missile systems, an air defense system, a Sukhoi 25 fighter jet. Overall, from February 24, 2022 to April 16, 182,070 Russian soldiers were eliminated from the battle. The total combat losses of the Russian army also included 3,657 tanks, 7,083 armored vehicles, 2,795 artillery systems, 538 mass launch missile systems, 284 air defense combat systems, 308 aircraft, 293 helicopters. Helicopters, 2,339 drones, 911 cruise missiles, 18 warships, 5,658 troop and fuel transport vehicles, and 326 special equipment units. 2. Boss Wagner urges Putin to end special military operation. For 72 consecutive hours, just before Orthodox Easter, Russian troops bombed and ferociously shelled the city of Bakhmut in the hope that the Ukrainians would retreat. In a development that showed that this devastating Russian offensive was fruitless, the guerrilla leader Wagner Yevgeny Prigozhin said the Ukrainian troops were not going anywhere and advised Putin to end the so-called Operation Special Military. Newsweek has an article titled "Wagner Founder Urges Putin to End Special Military Operation," which means founder Wagner urges Putin to end the special military operation. We invite you and your brothers and sisters to follow the translation into Vietnamese through Thuy Con's presentation. Yevgeny Prigozhin, founder of the Wagner Group and an ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, called on the Russian leader to end the ongoing special military operation in Ukraine and focus instead on strengthening tried to consolidate Russia's control over the territories it had captured from Ukraine. For the Russian government and society as a whole, it is necessary today to put an end to the special military operation. The ideal option is to declare the end of the special military operation, to inform people that Russia has achieved the results they planned and that in a sense we have actually achieved them, Prigozhin wrote in a blog post on Telegram on Friday. Wagner Corporation is a Kremlin-backed private military company led by Prigozhin, who is contributing to Russia's military operations in Ukraine. Putin launched the war with Ukraine in February last year, known by many as a special military operation, in the belief that his country would achieve a quick victory over its Eastern European neighbor. However, Ukraine responded with a stronger-than-expected defense effort, backed and supported by military aid from the West, helping to thwart Russian military goals and limit its advance. Surname. More than a year has passed since the invasion, with fighting still concentrated in Ukraine's easternmost regions, with analysts suggesting that Russia's winter offensive efforts have largely failed. However, the Russian military has been supported by the Wagner Group, which recruited thousands of Russian prisoners last year to fight in Ukraine. According to Meduza, Prigozhin announced in March that more than 5,000 former prisoners had been released since last summer, after completing a contract with the group. Meanwhile, more than 50,000 prisoners were recruited by the Wagner Group during the winter of 2022, according to Russia Behind Bars, a non-profit human rights organization. We have destroyed a large number of soldiers of the armed forces of Ukraine and can report to ourselves that our mission is accomplished, Prigozhin wrote Friday on his blog. He also writes that, theoretically, Russia has achieved this decisive end by eliminating a large part of Ukraine's active male population and threatening another that has fled to Europe. Now there is only one thing left: to gain a foothold, to occupy the territories that already exist. But there is a sensibility: if Ukraine was a part of old Russia before, now it is a purely nationalistic country, added Prigozhin. If before February 24, 2022, the European Union greedily gave Ukraine tens of millions of dollars in aid, now tens of billions of dollars have been turned off for the war. The leader of the Wagner Group also emphasized the importance of Bakhmut, located in the Donetsk region of Ukraine and the site of fierce fighting between the Russian and Ukrainian armies, as well as its benefits to the Russian military. The protracted battle at Bakhmut is extremely beneficial to the Russian army, because they have already captured a large part of Ukraine's territory by 2022. If the special operation remains within these boundaries, plus or minus a few tens of kilometers, this would solve many of the tasks of the New World Order. Bakhmut allows the Russian army to strengthen, occupy favorable defenses, solve internal problems, prepare forces to be mobilized and fully equipped to deal with any rebel forces. Any air force, wrote Prigozhin. He explained Bakhmut's importance to Russia, saying that Bakhmut is extremely beneficial to us, we crush the Ukrainian army there and limit their activities. New World Order is a phrase that often refers to an important geopolitical shift, but it is also used to promote a conspiracy theory that there is a secret global agency ruling world under a totalitarian regime, which aims to focus on stripping states of sovereignty. Earlier this month, Prigozhin contradicted his earlier claims about Russia's victory in Bakhmut shortly after the Ukrainian military denied his claim. He said that Bakhmut has been captured and that the Ukrainian army is concentrated in the western part of the city. Prigozhin later said through his press service on Telegram that the enemy is not going anywhere, they are still in Bakhmut. They organized the defense inside the city, first next to the railway line, then the high-rise buildings in the western districts of the city, he said, adding that, now, I don't think there were any attacks. Newsweek has reached out to Ukraine's foreign ministry for comment. 3. The bloodiest war unprecedented in Bakhmut. The Ukrainian military says Ukrainian and Russian armed forces are engaged in bloody fighting in the ruined eastern city of Bakhmut, but pro-Kiev forces are still fighting. Hold out, the Ukrainian military said. Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Lieutenant General Igor Konashenkov said on Sunday that fighters from the Wagner mercenary group had captured 2 more areas of the city of Bakhmut. The city was the main target of Moscow's offensive in eastern Ukraine. Colonel Serhiy Cherevadye, spokesman for Ukraine's Eastern Military Command, denied that during a press conference at the Kyiv Press Center Sunday afternoon. However, he stressed that the bloodiest battles of the last few decades are being fought right in the heart of the city's urban core. Our soldiers are doing everything in fierce and bloody battles to weaken the enemy's fighting ability and destroy their morale. Every day, in every corner of this city, they are doing it successfully. Smoke is seen in drone footage of Bakhmut released on Saturday. Russia's defense ministry said Wagner units had occupied 2 areas on the northern and southern outskirts of the city. The Russian army's paratrooper units are supporting the claimed offensive by holding back Ukrainian forces on the flanks, Igor Konashenkov said. Reuters could not independently confirm Igor Konashenkov's report. The UK said in an intelligence update on Friday that the Ukrainian military was forced to cede some territory in Bakhmut as Russia launched a new offensive there. President Volodymyr Zelensky made no mention of Bakhmut in his nightly video speech on Sunday night and reiterated Kyiv's wish to join NATO as soon as possible. Ukraine's president said his country would need effective security before that happens, but gave no details. 4. Ukrainian officials said Great Easter prisoner exchange took place. Go out. About 130 Ukrainian prisoners of war have been released and returned home in a major Easter exchange, a senior Ukrainian presidential official said Sunday, the government's Easter holiday. Orthodox. Ukrainian and Russian forces regularly held prisoner exchanges during the invasion of Moscow, now in its 14th month, Reuters reports. We are bringing back 130 of our people. The exchange has taken place in stages over the past few days, Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, said. It is unclear how many Russians were brought back in another way. Yermak said those returning home included troops, border guards, members of the National Guard, sailors, and employees of the State Border Guard. This is the second major prisoner exchange in the past week. On Monday, Russia and Ukraine said they had conducted a prisoner exchange, with 106 Russian prisoners of war freed in exchange for 100 Ukrainians. 5. Intelligence Bulletin of the UK Department of Defence Intelligence. In the latest intelligence report published on the afternoon of Sunday, April 16, the UK Department of Defence Intelligence discussed the case of Mr. General Mikhail Teplinsky, commander of the Russian airborne forces. There are reports that he is a general, but according to Russian military bloggers, he is only a senior general, that is, 1 level below the general. The rank of senior general is not present in the militaries of many Western countries, creating conditions for confusion. Mikhail Teplinsky was awarded the title of Hero of Russia in 1995. Mikhail Teplinsky was the field officer in charge of Russia's relatively successful withdrawal west of the Dnipro River in November 2022, and he received many compliments. Commended in Russia as a competent and pragmatic commander. In January of this year, he was sacked after defeats in eastern Ukraine. In the latest intelligence report, the UK Department of Defence Intelligence suggested that he was reinstated because Putin really couldn't find anyone better than him. We invite you and your brothers and sisters to follow the translation into Vietnamese through the presentation of Kim Phuong. Senior General Mikhail Teplinsky, commander of the Russian Airborne Service, or VDV for short, with a high probability of returning to the role. Important role in Ukraine. He was previously fired from his position in January. Teplinsky may be one of the few senior Russian generals to be respected by the military. His recent turbulent career highlights the bitter tensions between factions within the Russian general staff over Russia's military stance in Ukraine. It is unlikely that Teplinsky's mission will be limited to VDV units, but it is very likely that he will uphold the traditional role of the armed forces as an elite force. In recent days, VDV has resumed its important mission in the battle for Bakhmut and is able to carry out a new integration with TOS-1A thermobaric missile launchers in the Kremenna region. 6. The American Institute for the Study of War says that Russia's Pacific Fleet lacks combat power. Newsweek has an article titled "Russia's Pacific Fleet Lacks Combat Power Despite Posturing." ASW, meaning the American Institute for the Study of War notes that Russia's Pacific Fleet lacks combat strength despite trying to appear majestic. We invite you and your brothers and sisters to follow the translation into Vietnamese through Thuy Con's presentation. Russia's Pacific Naval Fleet likely lacks the combat power needed to pose a threat to other countries, a think tank has said. The Institute for the Study of War, or ISW for short, a US-based think tank, in its latest analysis of the conflict in Ukraine on Friday commented on Russia's decision to launch arson missile and torpedo tests as part of a surprise exercise by the Pacific Fleet. The ISW suggested that the Kremlin may have intended to use the Pacific Fleet's combat readiness tests to try to block Japan's support for Ukraine ahead of the Group of Seven summit, or G7 for short, in May. According to figures released by the Germany-based Kiel Institute for Global Economics on April 4, the total aid Japan gave Ukraine during the war amounted to €5.66 billion or $6.2 billion, as of February 24. Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu made the announcement Friday, saying on state television that its goal is to strengthen the armed forces' ability to repel possible enemy aggression from the direction of the sea and ocean. Shoigu said the inspection was aimed at assessing the status and enhancing the readiness of military commanders, troops, and forces to carry out missions in all strategic directions, and to further learn that the test would repel enemy landings south of the Kuril Islands and Sakhalin Island. The islands of Kunashiri, Etarofu, Shikotan, and Habamai in the Kuril Island chain were captured by the Soviet Union at the end of World War II. Tokyo claims the islands as its northern territories, and the issue has strained relations between Russia and Japan for decades. A peace treaty formally ending World War II was never signed by Russia and Japan, largely due to a dispute over a group of islands claimed by Japan but invaded by Russia. Because it is located between the large Japanese island of Hokkaido and Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, the archipelago offers a number of military and political benefits. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida, who will chair the G7 summit from May 19 to 21, made a surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital Kyiv in March, saying his country was able to demonstrate determination to lead the response to the invasion of Ukraine. Russia's Eastern Military District recently deployed a battery of Bastion coastal defense missiles to Paramushar Island in the northern part of the Russian-invaded Kuril Islands, which the ISW assessed as potentially a warning to the Russians. Japan on its continued support to Ukraine. The ISW said Russia may intend to use its military posture in the North Pacific to raise concerns about a military escalation with Tokyo in an increased effort to prevent Japan from continuing to support Kyiv when the country hosted the G7 meeting in Hiroshima. However, the ISW assessed that the Russian military was not capable of threatening Japan at this time, noting that it had previously reported that units of the 40th Marine Brigade and 155 of the Pacific Fleet suffered heavy losses near Volodar, eastern Ukraine, in the Donetsk region, earlier this year and into late 2022. The Pacific Fleet may lack the combat power available in the Pacific region to project its posture in a way that actually threatens Japan or is consistent with Russia's power projection efforts to persuade China that it is a military power on par with Beijing, the ISW report said. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry by email for comment. 7. The United Kingdom says that Russia is preparing for a protracted war as it seeks to eliminate the possibility of draft evasion. In the latest intelligence report, the British Ministry of Defence Intelligence said the following. On April 11, 2023, the Russian State Duma passed a law establishing a unified registry of individuals eligible for military service. The main implication of this measure is that in the future, authorities will be able to serve enlistment calls electronically, rather than by mail, removing an obstacle that previously allowed some people to escape. Military service. With individuals' enlistment call data now digitally linked to other state-provided online services, it is likely that authorities will punish draft evaders by automatically restricting rights to work and restrictions on foreign travel. The measures are expected to come into force by the end of the year. They do not specifically indicate any new wave of forced mobilization. Currently, Russia is prioritizing efforts to recruit more volunteers. However, the measure is most likely part of a long-term approach to supplying personnel as Russia anticipates a protracted conflict in Ukraine. Commenting on this UK intelligence report, Newsweek published a report titled "Russia Preparing for Lengthy War as it Cracks Down on Draft Dodging, UK," which means the UK believes that Russia is prepared for a protracted war when the country attacked the possibility of evading the draft. We invite you and your brothers and sisters to follow the translation into Vietnamese through Thuy Con's presentation. Britain's Ministry of Defence on Saturday said Russia had launched a crackdown on its citizens trying to evade military service, with President Vladimir Putin appearing to be preparing for the long haul in his invasion of Ukraine, which he launched in February 2022. In its latest assessment of the conflict in Ukraine, which turned a year old on February 24, the ministry noted that on Tuesday, the Russian State Duma approved past legislation to establish a unified registry of individuals eligible for military service. In the future, they will receive their enlistment orders electronically, rather than by mail. In doing so, the Russian government effectively removed an obstacle that had previously allowed some people to evade draft, the British Ministry of Defence said. The move came before a much-anticipated counteroffensive by Kyiv, and as the death toll on both sides continued to soar. Putin in September 2022 ordered the mobilization of 300,000 combat reservists in Ukraine, a move that has sparked a number of nationwide protests and a wave of migration of Russians across the border into neighboring countries, such as Georgia, Finland, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia, to avoid enlistment. Putin also signed a law in 2022 punishing those who refuse to serve or evade service with up to 10 years in prison. The British Ministry of Defence said that Russian authorities now have the ability to punish draft evaders by automatically restricting the right to work and restricting foreign travel, as the data of citizens' conscription orders will now be revealed. Digital links with other online services provided by the state. This measure allows military registration and enlistment agencies in Russia to send enlistment summons by registered mail or electronically. Once issued, individuals called up for enlistment will be barred from leaving the country until they arrive at the military registrar's office and enlist. According to local media, a man who evades the call to enlist will be deprived of the right to drive a car, register for real estate, and take out a loan. The measures are supposed to come into effect by the end of the year. The UK Ministry of Defence said it assessed that Russia is now prioritizing efforts to recruit more volunteers. However, this measure is most likely part of a long-term approach to providing personnel as Russia anticipates a protracted conflict in Ukraine. Putin has taken a number of measures to expand his recruitment efforts for the war in Ukraine, including signing a decree on March 27 removing the upper age limit for members of the National Guard. Russian National Guard troops serving in the regions of Ukraine temporarily occupied. Newsweek has reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry by email for comment.